Okay, another part of this lecture that I really wanted to focus on with you guys is the role that vitamin D plays in a lot of different health conditions. Vitamin D, we've talked about so far, is already necessary for absorbing adequate calcium and magnesium from your small intestine, from the diet, just to get it inside your body and in the blood. But it really plays a much, much greater role in the human body. And the problem is that as of right now, most Americans are severely deficient in vitamin D. If most of you guys look at your Fit Day sheets, the summary of all your nutrients, most of you will find that your vitamin D is low. Unless for some reason you're drinking a lot of milk, it will show up as being really high. But again, we talked about that's usually a form that's not very absorbable. It's D2 instead. So if yours shows really high, I would still question whether or not you're getting an adequate amount of active vitamin D. So what I want to focus on mostly is the connection between vitamin D and cancer. There has been a phenomenal amount of research being done right now, and vitamin D has been shown to not necessarily cure many forms of cancers, but a deficiency of vitamin D is linked to an increased risk of a lot of cancers. So one of the reasons why is for this reason down here. If you'll notice, it says vitamin D works locally on well over 30 different tissues. It aids in regulating cell growth. Remember what cancer is. Cancer is basically cells that are growing out of control. Same thing with down here, cell proliferation. Again, it's just another word for cell growth pretty much. So how does it influence this? Most of the time what happens, and what we've discussed so far, is that there's a huge amount of free radicals that are produced in the body by some kind of a toxicity. And the free radicals, once they get into the cell membrane, they head to the nucleus and they start messing up or mutating the DNA. Many times when the DNA starts to become mutated, then the cells will grow out of control. It's as though the code that says stop growing is now destroyed, and so the cell doesn't know when to stop growing. Vitamin D is almost like a backup mechanism to help that cell to stop growing. So even if free radicals do get in and mutate the DNA, cancerous cells start growing. If there's plenty of vitamin D in the body, the vitamin D will actually embed itself in that cell and say, hey, wait a minute, you've got to stop growing. You're not supposed to be growing right now. So vitamin D is very effective at making sure that a normal cell that might become mutated doesn't become a cancerous cell, or if it does start to become a cancerous cell, that it's pretty much killed right away. So again, we're not talking about somebody who has active cancer. Vitamin D would probably be beneficial, but it's not powerful enough to stop active cancer. But it most certainly will prevent a lot of cancer. The other thing is down here. Autoimmune conditions. For those of you who might not be aware, MS stands for multiple sclerosis, RA stands for rheumatoid arthritis. These conditions in particular benefit from massive amounts of vitamin D through supplements, and a lot of times what's been found is that people who are prone to those conditions or get those conditions have lacked vitamin D in their lives for quite some time. How they found this out is really quite interesting. If you jump over to the next slide, there is this longitudinal line here at about 40 degrees across our country, in which in the southern part down here, we tend to get a lot of direct sun. And most of us know vitamin D comes from the sun. What they found is that people that actually live in these regions down here tend to not be nearly at risk for multiple sclerosis and rheumatoid arthritis, a lot of specific cancers, and a lot of other autoimmune conditions. However, people that live up in the north or north of that particular line up here have been very much at risk. And in fact, Denver specifically, even though it's right on the line, that has one of the highest cases of multiple sclerosis patients. Some of that reason is because of the high altitude as well as being just about north of that line. So a lot of the northern states just don't get enough direct sunlight to where there's adequate vitamin D in the body. One prime example of this, when I was a kid, I lived in Michigan. In Michigan, the winters are long and they're often very gray. And so it was very well known that when you raise children in Michigan, you have to give them vitamin D supplements throughout the entire winter. Otherwise, their immune systems would just start to break down because there wasn't adequate vitamin D. And so they started discovering too that, again, people raised in Michigan, people raised anywhere in the north or the northern part of the United States are very much at risk for the cancers and the autoimmune conditions. So by discovering that, they started looking at why that would be, and they found the link to vitamin D. Another element as to why vitamin D helps in preventing cancers and preventing autoimmune conditions is because of its ability to actually modulate the immune system. And I think in the previous slide, yeah, I mentioned it down at the bottom, it builds the immune system. If somebody does not have adequate vitamin D, their immune system is pretty weak. And most of that, like other fat-soluble vitamins, we've talked about it before. The fat-soluble vitamins go into that lacteal first in your immune system. So it's like it acts on the immune system before it ends up in your blood and acts on other parts of the body. So that becomes very important. So I want you guys to realize more than anything in these two slides that vitamin D is an incredible vitamin that works in many, many ways and on many conditions. The other thing is that, like I had mentioned before, most of us are very, very deficient in vitamin D. And this is another prime example of where the RDAs, or in this case, it's the AI, there isn't really a recommended daily allowance, but there is an adequate intake. It is very true that right now it is set at only about 400 IU. That's being questioned by a lot of physicians. Most of the time in a wellness exam nowadays, you will actually get your blood tested for vitamin D levels, and they're finding that most American adults are well below half of what they need in their vitamin D for each day. So 400 IU, even though that's what's found in supplements, is not nearly what needs to be consumed. I would say for children should be getting about 500 IU as just a maintenance dose. And adults often, what I would recommend and what my doctor recommends is about 1,000 to 5,000 IU. That is way above what is recommended by the FDA. Okay, but again, a lot of people might say, well, vitamin D, it's fat soluble, it could be toxic. Theoretically, yes, but we have never seen a case in which there's been a vitamin D toxicity. Is it because it's just not possible? Probably not. It's probably because we're just so low in it that we're not even getting enough. So 1,000 to 5,000 IU per day is a good maintenance dose. A lot of times, if people are extraordinarily low, or if you're dealing with something such as multiple sclerosis, then we will actually give well up to 10,000 IU a day just to try to build the levels back up. Once they're built up, then you start lowering your dosage again to somewhere between the 1,000 and 5,000 IU. So I just want to point that out as a good example of how, again, if you're not even making the 100% RDA level, or again, in this case, the AI, then you're probably deficient. So take a look at your fit day, see where your vitamin D is, and consider that with regards to your risks for cancers, your risks for autoimmune conditions, as well as your ability to absorb adequate calcium and adequate magnesium.